Are on their way. The sheets are on. All right. I apologize. It was all a little bit last minute. I'm not Rabbi Friedman. I'm sorry to disappoint. But Rabbi Friedman called me about 15 minutes ago saying that he's been on the road for about 2 hours and Kvish Echad is blocked. There are protests. And I guess that's something that we have to take into account these days, living in Yerushalayim. So therefore, he's not going to be able to make it, and I'm going to be giving the share in his place. Yes. Correct. So this year, we're not going to be covering that today, but I'll tell you in just a moment. This year, as somebody just pointed out, we have Erev Pesach, which falls on Shabbat, and that does cause a lot of questions and complications. If you're interested in that, I'm going to be giving share on that here, actually upstairs, on Sunday morning at 10 a.m., if anybody's able to make it. If not, there is that share will be recorded, that will go up on YouTube, so that I refer you to that if you're interested. But today we're going to talk about something else. Today we're going to talk about the Haggadah and the structure of the Haggadah. I know this year was originally advertised as Chametz on Pesach and after Pesach. Again, we've changed topics, we've changed speakers, so I apologize. But, coming up to Pesach, so there's a lot of preparation, as you are all aware, I'm sure. We are all very, very busy cleaning out our Chametz and cutting out our kitchens and getting rid. And sometimes, unfortunately, with all the physical preparation that takes place, you get to the Seder, and we forget to prepare. What about the Seder? What about the Haggadah? What about Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim? It's important to invest all the time making sure that our food is kosher, but it's also important to invest the time making sure that we have the right idea and we know what we're doing at the Seder night. And that's why I want to talk about that now. The truth is, this is one of the great advantages when Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbat. I said I wouldn't talk about it, but I'll just say just a word, which is, usually we get to Leil HaSeder. Erev Pesach is a very, very busy day. It's very, very stressful. The whole week's been stressful. But Erev Pesach, and everybody's running around and doing this and doing that. And then you get to the Seder. When do you have time to open up the Haggadah, to open up the Sfarim, to learn a little bit, to think a little bit? So this year, we have a matana. As difficult as it is, and we'll figure out when we're going to eat. We have to get up earlier to daven, and we have to finish eating the chametz, and we have to have Sudash Lishit, and how do we do that, and how do we do that? But we have the whole day, all the preparations, all the biur chametz is done the day before. You have an entire day, 24 hours. You have Shabbat to come into the Seder from Shabbat. It's a time to rest, to relax, to learn, to think. And it's a different experience of Leil HaSeder altogether. So that is a matana that we have this year, and we should take advantage. Now, on the Seder night, how many mitzvot do we have? How many mitzvot do we fulfill on the Seder night? So, of course, the answer is it depends how you count mitzvot. And there are different ways to count. I heard this week that there's one sefer that listed as 13 mitzvot on the Seder night. We can get through if we count each cup, or we count halal, we count charoset, etc. I saw another sefer that says there are 64 mitzvot on the Seder night. I'm not quite sure how you get to 64, but we have to figure out how to count that. But according to everybody, if anybody doesn't have a sheet, by the way, they're here in the front. Most of the mitzvot that we fulfill on Seder night are d'Rabbanan. There are only 2 mitzvot that we have which are d'Oraita, which are right matzah and Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, telling the story of going out of Egypt. Right? Everybody's focused on the matzah. How much matzah do you have to eat? I saw even today in the OU magazine, the Pesach guide that's just come out. There's a chart and there's a graphic shows you exactly the size of the matzah. Everybody's thinking, how much is a kazait? How do we eat? How do we get the matzah right? How do we get the marrow right? How do we get the 4 cups right? Everything, right? One of the 2 primary mitzvot of the Seder night is Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, is telling the story of going out of Egypt. And that's one that we should dedicate some time to thinking how to get that one right as well. And what I want to do with you this afternoon, is go through the structure of the Haggadah. Because if I was to say to people here, if I was to go out onto the street and say to somebody, there's no one on the street because it's blocked, but if I was to go out and say, right, can you tell me the Haggadah from start to finish, off by heart, Baal Peh? Most people would think I'm crazy. We remember there's 4 cups, we remember there's 4 sons, we remember there's 4 questions somewhere, there's a bit of halal, there's that part with the psukim where everybody falls asleep, right? But to say the order of the Haggadah, and sometimes we're going through, we're telling the story, and we don't quite understand why this page follows the previous page in the Haggadah. What's this got to do with the story? And what I want to try and do with you today, and all of this is based on, this is not my original mahalach, this is based on a shiur by Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon. Actually, if you have his Haggadah, You see he has this in charts and in colors and does very, very nicely. This is going along with his outline. But he has an outline of the Haggadah, which by the end of the shiur will be very, very easy for us all to remember off by heart, right? The basic structure of the Haggadah, which part comes after which, why this fits in, why we're telling the story of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, and I think it can really shed new light on the entire Seder experience. We'll start off by this. Essentially, the central thesis is this. There is not one Haggadah, but there are actually 4 Haggadot. There are 4 stories, right? When we remember it like this, it'll be very, very easy to remember. Of course, it has to be 4. 4 is the number of Pesach, right? There are 4 sons, there are 4 cups, there are 4 questions. So there are 4 Haggadot. We are telling the story of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, telling the story of going out of Egypt, essentially in 4 phases, 4 acts, however you want to call it. And when we figure out what the structure is of each of those, we figure out why it is that we need 4, then we'll understand. And by the end of the shiur, as I said, we'll be able to think in our heads, off by heart, go through the structure of the Haggadah from start to finish. Again, all of this is the Maggid. Okay, so let's have a look. So you've got 2 pages in front of you. We'll come back to this page, the landscape. This is a photocopy from Rav Rimon's Haggadah, which essentially shows us the structure. We'll come back to it and we'll reference it throughout the shiur. You know, when Rav Rimon gives the shiur, he was here a couple of years ago. We did a Yom Iyun, and everybody had different colored pens and different colored highlighters, and you're going through and you're marking off in the Haggadah. We're not going to do that today, but if you want, when you get home, you can take out your highlighters and you can mark off the different sections, and it will help to remember the whole concept. Okay, so let's go through the source sheet, right? The A4 page. Source number 1, just to put us into the mood for this, Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik writes the following here in source number 1. He says, "Hatirun ali liftoach behara ishit." Says, let me share a personal story. Bezichroni achavayati v'lav davka bezeh ha'iyoni. Forget about the lamdus for a second. Forget about the learning. Let's talk about the experience. Talk about the memory. He says, "Botim lem shnei leilot miyuchadim." Says Rav Soloveitchik, in my mind's eye, I see there are 2 nights in the year which are exalted above all others. Leilot shenichnu beichut yechida b'mina u'merateket. 2 nights which are something special. Romamim b'ktushatan zoalim b'yofi mesanver. Okay, this beautiful poetic language, which I'm not going to try and translate all of it. But he says, what are the 2 exalted nights of the year? He says, Leil HaSeder v'Leil Kol Nidre. Seder night and Kol Nidre night. These are 2 nights which are just qualitatively different. Keyeled amati muksam. He says, as a child, I was hypnotized almost. Lenochach shnei leilot beilim eile, with these 2 nights. Moalim bol yalech atufim b'chod v'hadal. Agil haiti lachush nimratz mugash umelo hashra'a. I'm not translating everything, but he says it's very difficult to translate. But he says these are nights which just simply are full of inspiration. Right, and I bring this again to get us into the mood. Sometimes we get to the Seder nights, as I say, it's after all the cleaning, and it's after the B'tikat Chametz, and it's after all the kashering, it's after all the cooking. Can we just get it over and get to the food? No. And like I say, this year we have that matana, that it's not after all of that. We have the gift of Shabbat in between to get us into the Seder night. The main mitzvah, as we've said, of the Seder night, and the mitzvah which we are fulfilling through the Maggid part of the Haggadah, is the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. Source number 2, the Minchat Chinuch, says as follows. He says, why is this night different from all other nights? What do we mean by that? The question here, which we'll see in a few of the sources, is that on Seder night we have a mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, of telling the story of going out of Egypt. But we all know that every single night, every single day, and every single night, we have a mitzvah of Zechirat Yetziat Mitzrayim, of remembering Yetziat Mitzrayim. This is why, by the way, when we say Kriyat Shema, so there are 3 paragraphs in Kriyat Shema. The 3rd paragraph deals primarily with tzitzit. It's not necessary to say that at night, because at night we don't wear tzitzit, tzitzit for the day. So why do we have that paragraph there? Because it also mentions Yetziat Mitzrayim. And we have an obligation to remember Yetziat Mitzrayim every day and every night. We say it in the Seder as well. We say it in the Haggadah. And so the question, which all the Mefarshim ask, is what is the difference between the mitzvah which we have every night of Zechirat Yetziat Mitzrayim, remembering going out of Egypt, and the mitzvah that we have on the Seder night of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, of telling the story of going out of Egypt. Okay, and we'll see a number of different suggestions are brought in the Rishonim and the Achronim, and based on that difference between telling the story and remembering the story, we can understand exactly what it is, why we are telling, how we are telling, and what the structure of our Haggadah will be. So it says the Minchas Chinuch. He says, "Mitzvah lazkir Yetziat Mitzrayim b'kol yom v'chol laila." Every day and every night we have this mitzvah of mentioning Yetziat Mitzrayim. Right, mazkirin Yetziat Mitzrayim b'leilot. Af לכאורה חכמים פליגים מכל מקום רוב הפוסקים והרמב"ם מכללם פסקו כבן זומא. Okay, without getting into the technicalities, but this is actually a passage which we say near the beginning of the Haggadah. Rav Chaim Brisk, source number 4, says, he asks this question, and he suggests that there are 3 main differences. And these are the 3 unique characteristics of the Haggadah, of the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Source number 4, says Reb Chaim, every night we have the mitzvah of remembering going out of Egypt. What is different? What is added in telling the story on Seder night? Okay, there are 3 differences. It should have been 4, but there are 3. So he says like this: Aleph, לקיים מצוות זכירה אין צריך אלא להזכיר לעצמו יציאת מצרים. Okay, maybe people are already thinking this themselves. You think about the words telling, remembering, or mentioning, which is the same word in Hebrew, lizkor. The root zecher can be to remember, can be to mention. That's why, because a memory is just, it's a mention. It's there, it happened once, you remember it, you've mentioned it, done. But when you tell a story, you tell a story. The story has a beginning, it has a middle, you've got to build up the tension. Right? It's a completely different parsha. So he says, but more than that, he says with zechira, it's lazkir la'atzmo yetziat Mitzrayim. I have to remind myself, I have to remember. Aval b'sipur yetziat Mitzrayim, ha'mitzvah lesaper la'acher. Really, you tell a story. You don't tell yourself a story. You tell somebody else a story. Derech, but how do you tell a story? Derech she'ela v'tshuva. You start off with a question, you give an answer. This is a real... We look at the psukim which describe the 4 sons, describe the way we have to tell the story of coming out of Egypt. So it says, your children will ask you, and you'll tell them. There's a question, there's an answer. That's the way you're telling the story to somebody else. Right, the Rambam writes, and again, we remember a few years ago, this became tragically very relevant. Right, we've been growing up for many years, and hopefully this is not the case for anybody here. But the Rambam writes that if somebody is who tells the story, who asks the questions, and he says even if a person is sitting by themselves, at the Seder night, so then they tell themselves the story. They have to ask the question and answer themselves. But the point is, the way that we tell a story is the difference of the way that we just remember something. We're dealing with questions, we're dealing with answers, we're dealing with telling a story. That's number 1. Number 2, he says, בסיפור צריך לספר כל ההשתלשלות, וצריך להתחיל בגנות ולסיים בשבח. Okay, we'll see this maybe in the Gemara or in the Rambam, but he said we have a characteristic of the way that we tell the story. We begin with the beginning and we end with the end. מתחיל בגנות ומסיים בשבח. We have to start off with that which is disparaging, and we have to end off with that which is praise. How do we do that in the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim? What is the gnut and what is the shvach? Wasn't a rhetorical question, right? What is the gnut? What is the disparaging part of the story that we begin with, and what is the praise that we end with? Okay, we were slaves. That's the gnut, and we end up with the shvach. We were released. HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out. Oh.
It was a miracle. They removed the card blocking the road.
Okay, so I tell you what. So we'll finish the thought. And then we'll hand over to Rabbi Friedman. Okay.
You are very generous, Rabbi.
We go way back. It's okay.
He's going to go way back.
So I'll tell you this. The truth is, you've got the sheets, you've got the Dapei Makorot, and I'll finish the thought, and I'll give you enough that you can go home and you can finish it by yourselves as well. But what we're saying is this: Matchil b'gnut u'mesem b'shvach. We start off with that. So you've all just said the gnut is the fact that we were slaves, And the shvach is the fact that we're free people. That's only one opinion. There's machloket in the Gemara between Rav and Shmuel. What's the gnut and what's the shvach? One says, you're right, it's a physical story. Story going from physical slavery to physical liberation. But the other opinion is no. The gnut is not avadim hayinu, but it's mitchila of day avodah zarah yu avotenu. The fact that our ancestors were worshipping idols, the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought us out, brought us closer to Him, that is the shvach. Okay, so that's the second characteristic, that's the second story. And finally, he says the last thing, something unique to Yetziat Mitzrayim, is that we have the reasons for the mitzvot. We have Pesach, Matzah, Maror. That we have to mention. Rabban Gamliel tells us these three things, three characteristics we have to say, and without that, we've not fulfilled the story of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. So I'll just say like this. Okay, the structure of the Haggadah, the structure of the story has to be, is that we have questions and answers. We begin with questions, and then we give the answers. And then we end up with, and then we have some sort of praise. That is the structure, not just of one Haggadah, but that is the structure of all four Haggadot that we're going to see. And this is the way to remember it. There's always a question, there's an answer, and then it ends up with praise. Okay, so why do we need to do that 4 times? The reason we need to do that 4 times like this, very simple. If you have a look at this sheet, we'll show you. The first two, we just said, we start off matril bignot u'masem b'shvach. We start off with that which is disparaging, right? And then we end off with the praise. So those are 2 different stories. There are 2 different versions of that. One is the story of physical slavery and liberation. One is the story of spiritual slavery and revelation. Right? We need to mention both. So if you have a look on the right hand side, the first Haggadah is the story of Geulah Gashmit, right? And the second Haggadah is the story of Geulah Ruchanit. If you have a look at the middle paragraph, you'll see Avadim Hayinu. That's the main part of one story. And Mitchilah of Day Avodah Zarah, that's the part of the second story. Both of those Haggadot, so to speak, end off afterwards. There's a section of praise. Both of those Haggadot begin before that with questions. What are the questions? Either the Manish Tanah, or if you look at the 4 sons, you'll see they all ask questions. Okay, so that's the structure. That's the double structure. That's the opening part of the Haggadah. So seemingly it would be enough. We have a story. We have 2 Haggadot which tell us the story. That's enough. But no. And the reason that's not enough is for the following reason. The Rambam writes that we have to tell the story in such a way that it's engaging. We have to tell it in such a way everybody around the table has to be able to connect to this. Everybody has to hear the story the way that they would appreciate. So there are people who connect more to stories. There are people who connect more to lamdanut, going through the psukim, going through the drashot, understanding that way. There are people who understand more based on actual demonstration of what we have. So look at what we do. Again, I'll just say al regel achat, and afterwards you can look at it and fill in the gaps. But we have the first, we begin by telling a story, by talking it in that way. Then we get to the part of lamdanut. There's a Benz who's sitting at the table who says, I've just come home from yeshiva. I've just come home from Ben Azmanim. I don't have time for your stories. I want lamdas. I want to hear the psukim. I want to hear the midrashim. I want to go through. So we do the same thing. We start again. Tzei umad, look at the second column from the left. Tzei umad, ma bikesh lavan almi lasot Yaakov Avinu. That's a question. We begin with questions again, and we answer that question through the psukim, through the drashot, right? And then we end off with praise again. Kama ma'ala tovot, we get to dayenu. That's the third Haggadah. Okay. Finally, then we say, okay, we've done stories, we've done lamdanut, but there's a younger kids sitting around the table who don't want stories. That's not enough for them, and they don't want lamdanut. They want to see the action. They want the audio-visual presentation. So that's what we do. That's Pesach, Matzah, Maror. We lift the things, we pick them up, we point to the Seder plate. And again, Rabban Gamliel, this is Haggadah 4 over 4. We start off with questions. Pesach, al shum ma. Matzah, al shum ma. It's all questions. And again, we have that demonstration. And then we end off there with praise once again. And that's the bracha we say of Gal Yisrael. Okay, there's a lot more to talk about. There was mamash al regel achat. But I'm going to leave that with you. If you want to see this in greater detail, again, Rav Rimon's Haggadah, he goes through this entire malach, he goes through and he explains it. It's available in Hebrew, it's available in English. I don't get any commission if you buy it, but I'm just mentioning that. And that is begadol, the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. But you all came here to hear about Chametz and Pesach. So I'm going to hand over to Rabbi Friedman over there. Yes.